Well, after last week, I thought it's a tough act to follow. After yesterday, I certainly feel that even more. I don't know if there's that proverb in English, but in Polish we say, speech is at best silver, silence is golden. Right? I also got feedback from a couple people that I'm talking a little bit softly, the the guided meditation. So I'll try to yell at you about silence. We'll work it out. Just like backtrack a little bit and just give a little bit context of those retreats. This kind of format. Both Esha and I, we lived in monasteries for let's say over a decade each, and it's kind of like in some way like sharing the love affair of that sort of way of being, the collective practice, which used to be the primary mode in which spiritual teachings were unfolding, right, for thousands of years. Really, that was the main thing, and of course it was exclusive in some way. It used to be like, especially the deeper teachings were kind of mostly reserved, right, for those kind of home leavers and people who kind of just wandered around some teachers outside of society. And these days it seems to be happening less and less, right? The numbers are kind of dropping very clearly across the board, all traditions, Christian traditions and Hindu and Buddhist, and this kind of vocation of life of that kind is just, it just for whatever reason it stops happening that much, right? So I had this monk friend from South Korea when I used to live in a monastery there, and he used to have this saying, "Our job is to extinguish the candles." After every ceremony in a monastery or temple, there's more often than not there are candles, right? And the structures are usually wooden. So of course there's always someone's job to extinguish the candles after the whole thing is finished. So in a certain way, that's what this friend was communicating. Like, this way of life, this kind of style of practice seems to be coming to an end. And there's even when I was going, let's say, to Japan, there's maybe like 15 monasteries I could kind of choose from. And of course there was much more, but within my kind of capabilities of language and health and everything. But now it's, if I can think of couple, that's a lot. I guess it's a sign of times. Like now, even the kind of most direct and kind of deep stage of the deep end of the pool teachings are accessible one click away, right? Which is great. It has its own like dangers, right? I mean, of course, that's every single approach will have advantages and disadvantages, right? There's no way around it. That's the nature of relative world of opposites, right? So, there's probably some people walking around out there getting confused by non-doership, or like some kind of teachings that are maybe a little bit used to be given by teachers in those contexts, when they felt it appropriate to particular individual, right? But now it's all out there, which has also profound benefits. So we were kind of thinking about that and seeing that kind of all the world dying in a certain way, but there are certainly kind of important lessons that are inbuilt in the collective living that were supportive of that very kind of narrow bandwidth of teachings about awakening, just the kind of only insight, right? Which again, it's when it's pointed, it's also potent, right? So that's great. But thinking about the old traditions are so yeah, they have just this kind of tunnel vision of what they teach, and everything else is not welcomed, right? Like they don't really think much of let's say maybe there's a new modality that someone came up. There's so many things, even in the last 30 years, right? The way we can work with trauma, the way we can work with so many things that were absolutely unaccessible before. But yet, in this kind of old ways of looking at it, it's like the teachings of awakening is what was handed down to us. This was what was written in that scripture, or what this teacher said. But there's kind of not much room for anything besides that, right? So so in a way, those are a little bit like a sinking ships that just were the carriers of the most profound insights and making them accessible. But now it's kind of like working less and less just because of that kind of narrow focus in some way. For some people it works, there are still monasteries, and some people go there and get great benefit, and it's awesome, but it's happening less and less, and it might be possible less and less. So so the idea was how to kind of maybe bring those two components together, really, of kind of more pragmatic approach that doesn't have one size fits all sort of attitude, and at the same time not to kind of throw the baby with the bath and say like, oh, it's all, we can do exactly the same thing just using YouTube, right? Because it also has its own limitations, right? So initially, I don't remember. I mean, it's maybe 6 years ago. We were kind of thinking to pitch it to Adyashanti, because we used to practice with him quite a bit. But then the pandemic happened, and just things. The world changed also, even more towards Zoom, right? Towards YouTube, towards just like sit in your little box and that's it. So, but a few years have passed. The world have stabilized after that whole thing, and so we were talking to Angela also about the possibility of just doing something like that, where we come together and we live together as one body, and there is there is like a different different quality, even to like let's say the sort of retreats as they are done, like to just jump in somewhere for 5 nights, get your hotel room, everything is ready, and after 5 days you leave, and that's powerful too, and that's great. And we'll be seeing each other at some of those events too, even in a few weeks, probably some of you, right? But there is something a little bit different about that coming together, which was actually happening for those thousands of years, like the summer retreat, for example, right? Like in Buddhism, when the monsoon season was unfolding, they couldn't travel with the teaching, so they would just like sit around some little area, and they would just do this few month long or couple month long, however it rained, time where it was just very very focused time, and kind of within the group, but with some limited group, right? And with time it became more and more formalized, of course, and in the monasteries it was part of their rhythm, part of their kind of yearly schedule. And with the time, of course, in a certain way, things were kind of similar, right? Like, there are sometimes too many people that you could have in your facility, in your monastery. So there are different ways. Like these days, it's a random number generator. Angelo likes that because it makes it plain field, right? It's I think we had maybe 60 applications, and we are like 30 people, right? Um, in the old days in China, they would like people come and gather, and whenever a monk would want to kind of go through the gate, they would tell him, "There is no food here. You can't stay." And if they would just depart, thinking, "Okay, there's no food. I'll better go." Then that was their choice, right? But if they stayed at the gate and sat there in meditation, and one day passed, maybe on the second day it would like give them a little bit of rice, just to, not to starve them to death. But by the third day they'll be like, okay, come on in. Or in South Korea, for example, there's kind of famous story, another kind of random number generator. That there's maybe 90 spots for monks in a Zen hall, and people used to sleep in a meditation halls often, and there was like 150 people that came, right? So the kind of administrative director is coming to the abbot and saying, like, we can't, it's just impossible, like we have to just reject some number of people. So the abbot said, okay, go in the morning to the marketplace, buy a leg of a pig, and make and chop the meat, and make a meal which will be with the meat, with pork, right? And then we'll see what happens. The next day, they prepare a meal with meat. 50 monks get up and leave, and I would say, all right, now we have the crowd that is kind of not as narrow-minded. It's a little bit flexibility. Now we can do the retreat. It's just right amount. So of course, I mean, not to like take lightly the suffering and killing of the animal or anything, but that's, I guess that's why we did the random number generator this time. But generally, this coming together, and kind of, everybody having some part to play, even if small one, obviously, like our kitchen team is the beating heart of the retreat, and they have much more work, but if everybody contributes something, right, it's a different feeling. It's a different thing about that than just like coming to the retreat center. If there's not the right pillow in your room, just calling up the desk and asking to change it, because in a certain way the whole movement of the apparent separate self is, you could say, centrifugal, right? It works around I, myself, and me all the time, right? That's its nature, because obviously there are good reasons for that evolutionarily, right? Like, I need to protect that thing just to have offspring and propagate the species, right? I mean, that's the way the kind of biological beings are wired, and that will be always part of the picture in some way, no matter how much we want to achieve the total transcendence and all that. We still are flooded with hormones, and there is a certain conditioning, as long as we're within that's biological thing, that we won't escape. We can escape all the conditioning that we create on top of that, right, within this sort of self-structure that is being created in the mind, in the consciousness, when we develop the kind of self-consciousness, and uh, we more and more perceive everything through the lens of me, of self, that is at the center of the universe, is the kind of hero of this movie, right? Is the main protagonist of this entire thing. It's me, right? I mean, that's how it goes, right? Like, and later when all the perceptual filters start to like build stronger and stronger, by the time we're teenager, we, there's no other even possibility in our mind, right? Of course, I am the most important thing, and so it's just like there is this process that kind of starts there, and it's most likely just necessary, right, for survival. And there are a couple of people that I've either interacted with, or that they told me that they have never developed a sense of self, which I guess is possible. But vast majority of us, that's how it goes. So it all starts to revolve around me, right? So then when we start encountering the whole spirituality, even if of course something about it is kind of shining from those gaps between the structure, right? And there is like a natural feeling of that possibility. At the same time, since as long as we are still mind identified, the whole process is still coming from that perspective, which is I, myself, and me. Just like what this process can give me. It'll make me happier. Maybe people will like think I'm special. Like, I mean, whatever. Some of those things are funny when we said them out loud, but probably most of us had a little bit of that, right? When kind of engaging with this whole thing. So in a certain way, yeah, it's like this paradox, right? Of on one hand, the movement of awakening and liberation is beyond me, right? That's where it's heading. Even if we would like, and at first we definitely can go through a phase of like cosmic or universal me and all that, which is beautiful. It's awesome. I recommend. But eventually, that also might come to an end, right? And any sort of placing of identity within this whole thing of any kind, it can also just completely come to a stopping. But at the same time, there's this me, just wants to be special, right? Wants to get something out of it. So it's kind of like this journey of those two things, you can say, apparent, two things simultaneously, right, unfolding. So in a certain way, the good point about those old traditions was that they had a good methodology also about kind of like working with that kind of contradiction. And again, awakening is possible within any circumstances, right? So there's no external circumstances that will grant you that, and there's no external circumstance that will prevent you from kind of being able to access that, right? It's kind of more up to our sincerity or honesty or willingness. So in those sort of monastic settings, however, there's a lot of ways in which we have to compromise. You know, there's a lot of ways in which we can't have our way. Which again, there's nothing wrong about anything really, ultimately, right? But in a relative sense, if we are only looking through those lens of what I can get out of this whole project, and we are kind of more engaging with the whole thing, let's say without coming to a group thing, without interacting with someone who has gone through this process, and we are just, which of course nobody here is, but it's just kind of overarching point that, if we just like sit, listen to YouTube, live our life in our little unit, if we're not lucky, our unit maybe is like a little room. If we're like successful in the world, maybe our unit is like the big mansion, like this house. But still, it's like we are within our own world to some degree, and we are setting the rules, right? That's that's there are nice things about that too in some ways, right? Like I experienced that. I used to sleep like the tatami mat in Japan, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, is it a meter width or something, maybe less. So you basically sleep on that, and next to you on the next tatami is someone else sleeping, and next to you is someone else sleeping, and it goes. And if you happen to sleep next to a snorer, there you go. And it's not like you can be like, hey, I would like to change. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like, hey, this is what you got. And and if someone is like a really good snorer, as you probably have experienced before, like, it doesn't matter where the person is in the room and where you are in the room, like you will be kept up, right? So in a certain way, it's like there are ways in which so I'll go back to that. So so of course I enjoy sometimes when I have my own room, or even better if I'm like in some separate apartment, which doesn't happen to me much, but let's say if it does, it's fun, right? I mean, you don't need to compromise with anything. You can just be the king of the castle, right? But yet, when we are constantly within that paradigm, of course, we can still see through the illusion of separateness and all that. But it's like additional help actually, if we are kind of forced to see that actually there's 30 people here, right? And if we are like, again, if we are like even in some kind of more hotel style retreat, it's kind of like everybody's just like keeping the space, right? Like, I don't know if many people here have been to the Art of Living. It's a hall that can in North Carolina, we are doing retreats there, right? It's a hall that can fit 3,000 people. And but by the end of the retreat, everybody has like this little island. Like the whole hall is filled with people, and everybody has like this little thing, except for people on the chairs. We are kind of more jammed, but on the floor, it's like everybody has like a little spot claimed, like 10 square feet of my thing, and the whole room is filled with people, right? Like just somehow it just spreads out. But here, when we are like in the sort of environment where someone is making coffee for us, right? We are cleaning toilet for someone, or we're doing all those things. Then there is like a more feeling. It's of like being in it together, right? And so in a certain way, it's like there was this famous Buddhist book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, right, by Chogyam Trungpa. So it's a little bit working with that when we kind of approach initially this process, it's it's all about what we want to get out of it, right? And there is like a way of approaching it, of like, how can I serve that, right? So it's like a little bit like the famous quote by JFK, right? Like, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So in a certain way, it's a little bit of that sort of shift of, instead of like, what can I get out of it for myself, to kind of make this separate me even grander, so people can finally recognize that. It's more about like, how can I be of service, even if in a small way, to that vast truth. And because of all those compromise that we have to make, there is, like, even in the most practical relative sense, like we see, sometimes my win is someone else's loss, right? That's how it is. I remember very clearly, I went to a monastery as a very young man, in my early 20s, and young boys are not very, lacking situational awareness, or and I remember there was this one work period where we had to, like, it's hard work. So, it could have been carrying the shit, actually, right? Like in Zen monasteries, we have those tanks, right? When all your poop and piss goes inside, and then once, a couple times a month, everybody goes with this, there are those long scoops on those poles, and you scoop out the shit and pour it to those huge buckets, and then you take the bamboo poles and you put 2 buckets with shit on the bamboo pole, and the two guys, or usually guys were doing the carrying, would carry it, and then you'd pour it to the fields. It would decompose there, and then we would use it for our own veggies, and the cycle of life. But so and it was hard work. Like those were like, buckets were this size, right? And and if you don't work harmoniously, they splash. They do splash. I know it for a fact. So you have to work really well, and it's not like you're going on a flat surface. You have to go down to the fields. So one, it takes some work together. But anyway, that's a side story. And after that, we sometimes had like little sweets out and a little tea, just after hard work, right? And I remember this one day, there's there's this work that finished, and I'm going to the little place where the sweets would be put out, and then and I see that there are 2 types of sweets, right? There's, let's say, 25, 30 people in the monastery, and there's not enough, right, of stuff. So there's like a 15 of like a yummy chocolate cupcakes, and then there's 15 like a old, probably moldy rice crackers. Like, there's not even like kind of taste difference, or like, oh, I would, some person likes it. No. It's clearly one is the winner, one is the loser. So I'm arriving at the place and immediately grabbing the chocolate cake. I was just so proud of myself. I got the good one. And I remember this lay woman practitioner is coming, to the table. She's looking at this, looking at that, kind of saying, oh, 15, 15. Oh, okay. So she's taking the rice cracker. And I remember just feeling this shame settling in. It's like, wow, all right. It's just, it was very interesting. It was very interesting to see, just that I, myself, and me movement, which is strongly ingrained in us. So in a certain way, that's the also another paradox of it, that when things are going well, that aspect of us is also proud. You know what I mean? Often. So it's, even if we have like, oh, it's it's a great meditation, and of course it can loosen up that kind of clenching, but at the same time, there's something also like silently taking credit. For some time, that process can stop, but it's almost like something is feeling good about it. So in a certain way, the times when we are actually on our knees and things are not going well are very potent times for something else to come shining through those cracks in this apparatus of centrifugal movement of self, right? So, um, even if that's not how we might see it, right? But at the same time, like, needing to share a room or needing to, those are small, there's tiny things, of course, right? But there is something about going beyond that movement in those little things in which we need to kind of compromise, and we can't have everything exactly the way we kind of would decide for ourselves, right? And sometimes, this process can, as we all know, can, have ups and downs, and sometimes we can feel like, oh, let's say the moment that we're kind of like finally just like feel we just can't avoid feeling this one thing we wish we could avoid, right? Like just this one thing the last thing we would like to feel. Sometimes that's exactly where we are the closest to something actually profound happening, or some seeing occurring, or some letting go happening. Because in a certain way, it's not like we can do letting go, right? It's not something that can be done by the small self. It's something that happens. And sometimes in the strangest moments, it kind of the most unlikely moments that can happen for us. And often, again, it might happen for some people. I don't know. Some people seem to maybe have a little bit just like some karmic affinity, and when things are going great, then they suddenly see something and it's all good. But for myself, it was always when I was just like beaten to death. Just like just at the end of it all. And sometimes, yeah, in a strange ways. I remember very clearly one time, I was going for many retreats already when I was in a college. And I remember going for a gastroscopy. I don't know if some of you had the pleasure, right? You're going and there's this whole machine, and there's like this thing, like there's this cable, and there's like this little camera and some like thing that they need to like pinch part of your maybe large intestine or some part of it that they or maybe small, but they have to like take sample from somewhere, right? So there's this camera at the end of this whole thing, and the guy, the person operating it is telling me, oh, just swallow it, it's like a dumpling. It's I'm from Poland, right? So we eat pierogi. So he's saying it's just like pierogi, just gulp it down, and then it'll be all fine. So you kind of like, I don't remember. I think you lay on your side, and they enter this thing with the camera, and you feel it at the back of your throat. Kind of like gagging a little bit, and at some point you just try to like, do the movement of swelling, and it just goes down. And I remember laying there, of just like feeling this thing inside me, and just like feeling every movement I would make would just make something happen. It's right in your throat and everywhere, right? But I remember just this moment of laying there, of like utter, it's just like everything was out of my hands, and there was this profound surrender, just this complete stillness and peace, actually, just laying there, because everything was out of my hands, you know. So it was very interesting. I was going for all like hardcore Zen retreats, and and all that. But yet, in this hospital room, like somehow I felt like, oh wow, that was powerful. That was in some way very powerful, because at the retreats I'm in charge. It's my concentration, it's my endeavor, right, in some way. But here it was like, I had to bow down to the situation in a certain way, right? So here we are, at the retreat, and I'm pretty sure not everybody is miserable all the time. I hope. It's there's beauty, there's a sense of connection, and but yeah, I it's just the whole point maybe of this short talk is about like appreciating everything, appreciating also the things that actually are out of our comfort zone, right? They're pushing us out, and kind of challenging us in a certain way, and kind of remembering the spirit that we are kind of all like one, like one organism almost, right? Just the heart is doing something, kidneys are doing something, stomach is doing something. So each of us, is an important part of this retreat, and um, all every way in which something went in a way that we had to kind of compromise or let go of something is precisely the very mechanism in which we all we're kind of a little bit wrapped off from like something can fall away through that, right? There's this old metaphor in Zen monasteries about washing potatoes, right? If you take potatoes and you need to wash big amount. If you wash each potato with like a little brush or something, it'll take you a lot of time. But if you throw all potatoes to one pot, take a stick and kind of just make the potatoes bump into each other, potatoes would naturally be clear with way less effort. So this is the idea. Throw all the potatoes in, let them bump into each other, mix it all up, and through that layer, because that's the outer layer, the self-referential pattern is the outer layer. You can say it's kind of something that was added. Potato was just born in an environment there was a lot of dirt. That's just how it grows. That's our world. That's the relative world, right? So so there's like just outside on the potato, there's just some dirt. So we throw all of them together and just bring them back to their kind of natural, pristine potato nature.
So we can make fun.
We can make fun all right. I see the time is up. So yeah, let us enjoy this pot while it lasts.